Your top story this morning, Morgan Stanley CEO John Mack is stepping down, handing the reins to co-president James Gorman. Here with his insights and analysis is former Wall Street investment banker and House of Cards author, as well as Bloomberg contributing editor, William Cohan. Bill, always glad to see you. Before we get ahead to this #1 challenge for Gorman, I want to ask you about Mack. I mean, he's not exactly leaving on a high note.
Well, he's had his troubles, right? I mean, this near-death experience that Morgan Stanley almost had last September and October, obviously rattled him to his core. I mean, I think he's described him as a bit of like a religious conversion for him. On the other hand, let's face it, he deserves a lot of credit for bringing that firm back from the brink. He faced down Henry Paulson when Henry Paulson wanted him to sell the firm to J.P. Morgan. He said, no, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to get the money from Mitsubishi. And the stock has recovered like fivefold since then. So while it's down from its highs, it is recovered from 6 and change to near 30 now. So you got to give him credit for that. So you don't think he's going to be shackled with this idea of, okay, he really didn't swing for the fences. He didn't anticipate this upturn for fixed income revenue. He missed the ball. You think people are going to remember the good stuff? I think people are going to, or people like me or historians are going to put everything in balance, right? He took the firm much more, he raised the firm's risk profile. If people had stayed like Phil Purcell had wanted to, ironically, at Morgan Stanley, even though he was extremely unpopular, the firm probably would have gotten through this crisis a lot better. He took the risk profile way up much higher and suffered the consequences, pulled it back from the brink, though, and I think people are going to remember, hey, 6 to 30, okay, we can live with that. I wouldn't be surprised to see Morgan Stanley actually have figured out in the third and fourth quarters of this year how to make money again, and I think this is a perfect time for him to go out.
As Deirdre said, Bill, we've got to get to James Gorman, the guy who's moving in. He's a co-president. He's been at Morgan Stanley since 2005, a consultant, a lawyer, not really your typical Wall Street CEO. I want to read to you a quote from Brad Hintz from Sanford C. Bernstein. He says, I'm concerned that Morgan Stanley's board of directors is placing an admittedly capable executive with largely a retail brokerage operating background in charge of a global capital markets firm with the second largest investment banking franchise in the world. Do you think people ought to be concerned the same way Brad Hintz is concerned?
I don't know. I think there's a little too much is made of that. I mean, if you look historically at other firms, I mean, Merrill Lynch, rest in peace, for many years was run by the brokerage side of the business, David Kamansky, and he ran an awfully big investment banking business as well, and it worked out, pretty much just fine.
And Gorman is even credited, right, for sort of bringing Merrill's brokerage unit to a new level, focusing on asset management, bringing in a wealthier clientele.
Absolutely, and I was talking to Greg Fleming yesterday, the former president of Merrill Lynch, and he was singing the praises of James Gorman, I guess. Doesn't like to be called Jim, so we'll do that for him. And I think what it does signal quite dramatically, though, is that Morgan Stanley is going to continue to be very careful about the risks it's taking, is going to be focusing on recurring revenue that you can get from the brokerage side of the business. I mean, the contrast between Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs could not be any greater now, both in the backgrounds of the CEOs and the way the firms are operating at the moment.
So is that Gorman's #1 challenge, really, sort of calibrating the amount of risk to take, balancing it with, as you say, the brokerage business? That's basically, if he gets that balance right, he gets it?
I think so. I think that's where it's at.
Can a guy who has not spent years on the trading floor, as John Mack did, right, formerly a bond guy, is steeped in the ways of Wall Street trading, understand risk the way that you need to understand it on the trading floor, the way that the folks at Goldman Sachs understand it?
Look, I think that James Gorman is a very smart guy. He's been a consultant to the industry, so he knows what he's been in the industry. I mean, I guess I'd liken it, Eric, to did David Kamansky know how to have people in place at Merrill Lynch during the years when it was making a lot of money, when he was a broker, to manage the firm's risk, to manage the firm's investment banking business? The answer is they did a pretty good job under David Kamansky. Will James Gorman be able to do what Lloyd Blankfein can do at Goldman Sachs?
Okay.
Probably not.
But those are two pretty key words. Pretty good job, right? Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Look at where Merrill Lynch's investment banking. Look what happened to Merrill Lynch, right? They blew up. The whole CD, the adventure into CDOs
that
was a disaster.
Kamansky.
Subprime mortgages.
Right.
No, but
that was Stan O'Neill.
Yeah, that's true. But Merrill Lynch, as an investment bank, was not the measure of Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs in the 1990s.
Well, at one point, it was, because I worked there. I mean, it was in the late 90s. It really was on a par, and coming up fast behind Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. It's amazing, actually, if you think about it, how similar, once upon a time, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley were. and how dissimilar they're going to be now. I mean, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley have very different business plans at the moment.
Bill, thanks so
Yes.
much for stopping by. And we're
My
going to see
pleasure.
much, much more of Bill Cohan. He is a newly minted Bloomberg contributing editor. So glad to have him with us here.